This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day and welcome. We're coming on the air with breaking news. The federal indictment against former President Donald Trump has just been unsealed, and we're learning new details about the 7 charges he's facing over his alleged mishandling of classified documents after he left the White House. It comes after we first learned about the indictment last evening. This is the first time a former president has been charged at the federal level. The special counsel who led the investigation, Jack Smith, is also expected to make a public statement later this afternoon. Let me go right now to senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Laura, you've had an initial look at these documents. What are you seeing?
A remarkable set of circumstances here, Lester. Some revelations that we are learning for the very first time now that this indictment has been formally unsealed by that judge in Florida. I should mention there are 38 counts. This involves an alleged conspiracy between the former president and his body man and valet, Walt Nauta, someone who authorities believed had not been fully transparent about his instructions and moving documents around Mar-a-Lago, highly classified and classified materials. I want to point you to, in particular, some new revelations here. Some of this had come out from reporting, but some of it had not, Lester, including here an allegation made by the special counsel that, in fact, the former president showed materials to others who had not had authorization to receive them on at least one occasion in July of 2021 at his Bedminster Club. This has been something that's been reported on, where it was actually transcribed and taped, where he talked about a, quote, plan of attack that he said was prepared for him by the Department of Defense. The special counsel goes on here to describe another instance where he showed a document to someone who was not allowed to receive it, someone from his political action committee. And the special counsel alleges that that happened in August or September of 2021. So we have here willful retention of national defense information. That's the Espionage Act that we hear so much about. We also have here a conspiracy, as I mentioned, with his body man, Walt Nauta. So we're going to continue to go through this.
All right, Laura, I know a lot to pour through. Thanks. We're going to pause right now our coverage very briefly. So some stations are going to return to tennis. For the rest, we'll be back in a moment. All right, continuing our NBC News special report for the rest of the country right now. Laura, you were walking me through some of the revelations in this now unsealed and essentially now public document, the indictment here. Does this go into great detail as to what allegedly occurred?
Yes, Lester, this is what you call a speaking indictment. This is where prosecutors are offering for the first time in their own words their story, their accusations against the former president. There's been a lot of reporting about all of this for quite some time now, but this is the first time we are actually seeing it in the prosecutor's own words. And the revelations are stunning. The special counsel has accused the former president on at least 2 occasions in 2021 of showing classified documents to others who are not allowed to receive them.
And to be clear, in the one instance, he's acknowledging that these are not declassified documents.
That's correct. And the reason that's important is it goes to his state of mind. It shows that he actually understood the classification process. He understood his limits, his authority. I should mention, again, these are 2 different circumstances, one of which we had never heard of. The first one that happened in July of 2021, that happened at Bedminster. That one you've seen a lot of reporting about that. But this second one that the special counsel said happened in August or September of 2021, we had not known about him showing a member of his political action committee other material that's highly classified or classified. And I should mention here, again, this is the first time we are seeing official confirmation that he's been accused of participating in conspiracy with his body man, Walt Nauta.
All right, let me go to NBC's Garrett Haake. He's been covering the former president and joins us near his estate in Bedminster, New Jersey. Garrett, tell us the reaction you're hearing from there.
Well, Lester, we've not heard any reaction from the former president to the indictment being unsealed specifically. But remember, it was he who scooped the Justice Department last night by announcing that he would be indicted in the first place. He subsequently gave an interview and said he intended to plead not guilty to the charges, whatever they ended up being. Donald Trump and his political staff have really been preparing the ground for this moment for quite some time. They've been trying to condition Republican voters and Republican elected officials to see this as an attack by the Department of Justice, an attack by liberal prosecutors, an attack by his political rival, Joe Biden, meant to keep him out of the Oval Office. That's been his consistent line on the stump. He's released multiple campaign ads, one through his campaign, another through a super PAC supporting him, echoing those same claims. And you're seeing it pay political dividends for him now, with even some of his leading rivals for the 2024 nomination echoing his same language about this being a political prosecution. But Lester, given the details in this indictment, it is possible that some of that could change as lawmakers and others look through what we've all just seen publicly unveiled.
All right, Garrett, we'll ask you to stand by. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos is here. The two of you essentially have been tag teaming. It's a lot of information to go through. What has struck you so far?
Not a lot of surprises. We're seeing a lot of concealment of documents statutes, the withholding of documents, the even destruction, conspiracy. Although the alleged co-conspirator may come as a surprise to many, it isn't that much of a surprise when you consider that the government in this case is going to be looking for people that they can charge in addition that may eventually become ideal cooperating witnesses. And what better person to maybe consider an early plea deal than someone who was a close aide to the former president. Not a big surprise there that there might be conspiracy, because we knew all along that, at least according to Trump and his team, this was at least one of their supposed defenses was that, hey, other people were doing this beneath me, possibly without my knowledge. So again, not a big shock to see that other people may have been implicated in this entire documents fiasco.
Let me raise the question that was raised in the New York indictment a couple of months ago, and that is, under other circumstances, a different defendant. Is this the kind of case that would lead to an indictment?
Well, it's interesting. In cases like this, where people take away national security information or classified documents, traditionally the government has gone after those people. They haven't always charged exactly this set of crimes in this combination, but this is a very unique circumstance. I mean, rarely do you have a situation where a former president who has a different status than other traditional defendants who are charged with, say, concealing government documents, destroying them. The president is going to be raising a lot of different defenses that flow directly from the fact that he was at one point the president. Arguably, that may be why this case is venued in Florida. It could be that the government looked at the conduct in D.C., realized that much of it happened while the president was the president, and that might raise some presidential immunity issues, or at least motions that would gum up the process. So the government figured, well, since most of the conduct that happened while he was ex-president, that's something we'll have no problem charging him on. They decided, I'm guessing, to bring it down in Florida, to clean that up, make it an easier, more streamlined process, and avoid the inevitable motions which may slow down the process.
On that point, you can both comment here. For the initial part of this case, the judge in this case was appointed by Donald Trump. What does that mean in terms of going forward? Is that something that the prosecution may raise an alarm about?
I doubt it. I mean, the view that folks should take is that, yes, judges should consider recusal when warranted, but we have never had a situation like this where any president or former president who is charged, virtually every federal judge could potentially have that conflict, because every single federal judge is appointed by a president. So if it's a judge that was appointed by Trump, you might have the government saying, well, maybe we should get a different judge. But believe me, if this had been a Democrat-appointed judge, you'd be hearing the exact same thing from the president's defense team. So it's probably not going to be the case that merely because a political opponent's side appointed the judge and one side perceives that as a disadvantage, that alone would not be enough, even though Trump himself appointed this judge. And ultimately, Lester, it's a jury that decides this case. Even though the judge decides critical motions, and there will be many before this case gets to trial, ultimately it comes down to 12 members, 12 peers, 12 people from the community in this venue. All
right, let me go to former U.S. Attorney and senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg. He's also an NBC News contributor. I'm not sure how much you've been able to read of these documents so far, Chuck, but I'd like to get your first thoughts.
Yeah, one of the things I look for as a former prosecutor, Lester, is evidence of intent, indicia of consciousness of guilt. One of the counts is fascinating. They're all quite interesting, but I'm looking at the one that involves a conspiracy to obstruct justice with his aide, Walt Nauta. According to that count, Lester, Trump used one of his attorneys, identified only as Trump Attorney 1, and urged him to conceal information from the FBI, moved documents and boxes around, even to conceal them from his own attorney. And so by trying to use his attorney in this scheme to evade the FBI and to not respond to a grand jury subpoena that was issued to him, he ends up with another count in the indictment against him. Evidence of intent is incredibly important. Government has to prove that these crimes were committed willfully and intentionally, not by accident or mistake. And so obstruction of justice really plays right into the government's hands. It helps them meet that burden of proof. It helps them establish intent. And without intent, you don't have a crime. Accidents and mistakes and inadvertence are not crimes. Intentional misconduct, intentionally hiding or destroying documents or suggesting that your lawyer do that is a crime. And so when you see that in an indictment, you can almost hear the government's arguments at closing as it asks the jury to consider convicting this man, convicting him because what he did intentionally, and evidence of that intentionality is found in his efforts to obstruct the investigation.
All right, Chuck, thanks very much. Well, that is going to conclude this NBC News special report. We're going to continue our coverage on our streaming channel, NBC News Now, and of course this evening, full coverage when I see you for NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Thank you for watching. We'll see you a bit later on. Welcome back to our NBC News special report after the federal indictment against former President Trump was just unsealed. In other words, made public with a bit of a narrative as to what the government alleges. Let me bring back our panel here. Laura, I think you had a point you were going to make before we went to the break.
One of the more interesting parts here is how you see the prosecutors laying out the former president's intent. This is not somebody who regularly uses email or text message, but they have plenty of receipts and text messages from those around him, including his valet, and it appears to be how they have built their case, including using his own attorney. As you might recall, Lester, they actually were able to pierce through the attorney-client privilege and get certain materials from his attorney against his own client, which is highly unusual, but it can happen in situations in which the government can prove that that advice was used in furtherance of a crime, which is what the prosecutors are alleging here. Again, remarkable allegations that Trump actually directed his body man to move the boxes, to evade the attorney's review of those boxes, to conceal from his own attorney is apparently the theory of the case. Again, some of this we had known through reporting, but it is the first time we are hearing it from the U.S. government.
What do you both make of the fact that two members of his defense team have left since we got word of the indictments?
One of the things I've heard is that this could have to do with the fact that, for example, Jim Trusty is a D.C.-based lawyer in this case, is now brought in Florida. I don't buy that at all. This is a federal case. Other than having to fill out some forms and paperwork and get admitted pro hoc in the Southern District of Florida, which can be a hassle, overall, federal practice is federal practice. You hire local counsel to help you with the local procedure, but if you feel you can continue, and you've handled cases like this in D.C., you can handle them in the Southern District of Florida. So that reasoning that I've heard, I just don't find plausible. There must be some other reason, maybe some disconnect between strategy for the client and the attorney. Happens all the time. It happens a lot with Trump and his lawyers. So maybe not a surprise. It could be something as simple as Trump wasn't delighted with his attorney's appearance on the networks last night and in the last 24 hours. But I don't know how to read too much into that. But I imagine that the overall defense strategy will remain the same. They will argue, and they've already put out the narrative basically, that they were being picked on, that they were willing to work with the federal government. Federal government set arbitrary deadlines. They wouldn't allow rolling production, and that the defense here was willing to try and return these documents, and the federal government jumped the gun. That will be the central theme of the defense here.
Laura, what about defense strategies?
It's interesting that their best defense strategy all along had been that Mr. Trump knew nothing nothing about the movement of these boxes and that the White House merely swept them in and he knew nothing about it. This document that we have in front of us, this lengthy document, lays out a very different story where he is intimately involved in the movement of all of these boxes.
In this Bedminster conversation was recorded, Trump also said, according to this indictment, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, but this is still a secret. So those are the words that take away some of that defense.
It shows that he understands the limits of his authority when he's no longer president. When he's president, of course, he can declassify. He has the broad authority. And so when he talks about declassifying things in his mind, this statement from his own mouth shows he understands that not to be the situation, that not to be true.
Is this the kind of case, take away a former president, is this the kind of case that would often lead to a plea deal?
In the ordinary case, I would say yes. Just start with the statistics. 90+% of all federal cases, and I know I've been beating this drum, Laura's heard me say it 50 times, that 90+% of federal cases end in guilty pleas. Of those that go to trial, 90+% are found guilty on at least some of the counts. So just looking at the numbers off the bat, yes, almost everybody pleads guilty in federal court. Federal court is a very difficult place for criminal defendants and criminal defense attorneys to be. Given the choice, almost all of us would rather be in state court. And that's because the federal government, when they make a case, it stays made.
And not to go too ahead of our skis, he is innocent, obviously, until proven guilty.
But presumed guilty.
Innocent. Innocent, of course, but in a different setting, you might expect something like that.
In a different setting with another defendant, you can expect, and I think if you look back on similar charges like this, you see a lot of willingness or actual guilty pleas. You look back just during some of the outgrowth of the Mueller investigation. I believe you had former General Flynn. You had some of the other folks who were charged in connection with some of these major investigations in just the last few years. Some of them raced in when they were charged with crimes like Section 1001, which is false statements, false material statements. They came in, they pleaded guilty. Some of them even cooperated as cooperating witnesses. Most of these cases end in guilty pleas. That being said, and of course, Trump is presumed innocent, in all likelihood, this is the defendant that will never plead guilty, because there are those defendants in the world of white-collar crime and in federal cases that are firmly convinced that they did nothing wrong, and all they need to do is get their story out there. And that's exactly what Trump has done. He's gotten it out there on social media. He's gotten it out there at his rallies. He'll continue to do so. I would say there is zero chance that this is a defendant that would even contemplate pleading guilty.
But that's where his legal peril and his political interests might bump up against each other. Obviously, you read through a document like this, and in perhaps the normal case, this is a situation in which someone would look at this and decide a plea might be in their best interest. But he's been fundraising since he was indicted in the last case. He has managed to use what is, for any other politician, a devastating situation to his political advantage.
Well, you just walked me into the next lane of our conversation. Let's go to our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. Yeah, what about the politics? There's a conversation.
We're going to be talking about that, I think, for the next 18 months, Lester. You have seen some people in the broader Republican orbit say publicly that they wanted to hold off on making any kind of judgment related to these charges until exactly what we're all talking about here has come out, right? Until the details of the indictment have come out. We just heard that, in fact, in just the last couple of minutes from former Vice President Mike Pence, somebody who obviously knows Donald Trump quite well, somebody who is now officially going up against Donald Trump to try to win the Republican nomination for the White House. Chris Christie is somebody else, again, a competitor to Donald Trump now, an official candidate who has said he wanted to wait and see what the details are. And the details, as we've been talking about here, Lester, in this indictment are frankly extraordinary. They are extraordinary. Even though some pieces of them have been publicly reported in other outlets and by us in the past, there is plenty in here that is new and that is significant. When you talk about the legal liability that Donald Trump faces, Laura and Danny and others have laid out his state of mind based on his own comments about knowing that the declassification process needed to have happened while he was in the White House. But I want to direct you to a different section, too, related to what Chuck was talking about on the obstruction potential piece of this here. That Donald Trump, after being subpoenaed, had a conversation with his attorney where he said things like, wouldn't it be better if we just told them we don't have anything here? He said things like, well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents? In one anecdote relayed by an attorney, Donald Trump Trump made like a plucking motion, as though indicating to this attorney he wanted him to simply pluck some of the more sensitive documents out of this folder at question and at hand. These are the details that are significant, that speak to where Donald Trump's head was at in the days after the subpoena had been issued. I also want to point out that, again, while we had, I think, a pretty good idea of what kind of sensitive information was in these documents, the types of documents that the former president had, we are hearing this now formally and officially of what this was. These were, according to the indictment, information about U.S. nuclear programs, information about the weapons capabilities of the U.S., our military vulnerabilities, our allies' military vulnerabilities, plans for what we would do in a foreign attack. And you can also see the indictment lays out the variety of agencies, including the CIA, the Department of Defense, et cetera, who had documents wrapped up in this. There's these photographs in the indictment, Lester. They're sort of treated, colorized, if you will. They're not specific photos, but they show, for example, the way that these boxes were stored in bathrooms in one instance, in a shower in one instance, spilling over and revealing top secret information that somebody came in and sort of saw and said, I wonder what we should do about this. And I'm paraphrasing here. I think it gives remarkable insight into what was happening at Mar-a-Lago, in addition to everything else that we're talking about here. Donald Trump's personal involvement in determining what to do with these boxes at hand. So, bringing it back to the political question, Lester, right? You have to think that right now, in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, where these various Republican candidates are, they are doing exactly what we are doing, which is looking through this indictment, watching the news reports about it, looking to see what the Department of Justice has. You have seen some people, I think of his allies in Congress, like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, even before this indictment dropped, come out with a full-throated defense of the former president. Some have questioned the Department of Justice and cast doubt, echoing Donald Trump in that respect, on the what they describe as partisanship at the DOJ, but stopped short, I'm thinking of Nikki Haley here, of backing up Donald Trump personally himself. Will this indictment change that calculus? We're going to have to see probably in the next couple of hours. On that.
And we should note again, Jack Smith, special counsel, we will hear from him. We're told at 3 o'clock Eastern time that there will be no questions, but he will make a statement. Let me bring in former federal prosecutor and NBC News legal analyst Carol Lamb. Carol, if you could follow up a little bit of what we heard from Hallie about others in Mr. Trump's orbit and how they relate to all this.
Yeah, so Walt Nauta, his personal butler and aide, both at the White House and at Mar-a-Lago, has been charged along with Donald Trump in this conspiracy. And the last count of the indictment, count 38, just shows that he just out and out lied about his participation in moving the boxes at Donald Trump's behest. I do want to point out a couple of things. One is that the scope of this indictment and the charges in this indictment don't necessarily depend on these documents being classified, even though that's been a big subject of discussion, both by the former president and by the media, because we didn't know what the charges were going to be. It's the hiding of sensitive documents that he was not permitted to move from his office, but it doesn't necessarily depend on their being classified, although many of them were. Just to get into specifics, and Hallie mentioned this one in particular, I think paragraph 66 of the indictment, where one of his attorneys told the government that after putting together the documents to deliver to the government upon its request, Trump said, "Is what's in there?" I think he said, "Is it bad, good? Did you find anything?" And then he made a plucking motion to the attorney as if to suggest, if there's something bad in there, pluck it out. That's the kind of information that's very important for Jack Smith to have put into this indictment. It is what we call a speaking indictment. That's very different from the kind of indictment that was brought in New York by Alvin Bragg. This is a speaking indictment, so nobody can really question what the basis for this indictment was.
Carol, can I pick up on something you and I talked about as this was breaking last night, and that was the decision to go before the grand jury in Florida. Reading what the government has here, does that seem like a particularly shrewd move?
I don't know that it was a move that Jack Smith necessarily made because he thought tactically it was better for him to do that. I think, just the fact that the case is now before Judge Cannon, who presented some difficulties for the government, to be sure, in the search warrant of Mar-a-Lago. I think that Jack Smith looked at the whole situation and said, most of the crimes actually did occur in Florida. I don't want to have all the legal all the legal problems that could arise by stretching and bringing these charges in Washington, D.C., because defendants are entitled to be charged in the district where the crimes occurred. There are sometimes continuing crimes or conspiracies where you can find venue in another district, but in this case, I think Jack Smith made the call. The right place to bring these allegations was in Florida.
Carol Lamb, thank you. Let me bring in Catherine Christian. She's a former Manhattan assistant district attorney and an NBC News legal analyst. Last time we spoke was the day of the former president being indicted on state charges here in New York. And toward that, knowing that there are other cases still out there, are we potentially looking at a traffic jam of prosecutions? And what is that going to look like?
Well, practically, it's for Mr. Trump, it will be a mess because he has the Manhattan indictment. He has this indictment. He has a civil fraud case with the New York State Attorney General. He has an upcoming defamation trial, part 2, with Jean Carroll. He possibly has, if the Fulton County, Georgia district attorney gets an indictment in Georgia. So practically, it's hard to see how he's going to be on the campaign trail. He may be saying that he is going to be, but he's going to be going from courtroom to courtroom. Obviously, trials cannot happen simultaneously. The respective prosecutors will talk to each other. Usually it's the first case goes first, but federal court tends to run faster than state court. It's just the way it is. So practically, it's hard to see how he's going to keep up, this campaign, but he probably will. I find it interesting in this indictment, and I'm not a speed reader, but the special counsel uses Mr. Trump's words against him. When he was running for president on page 9, he spoke, and I'm sure this was a dig at Hillary Clinton and about her emails. He spoke about how when he became president, he will protect classified information. The special counsel also includes a statement that Mr. Trump made in 2018 when he was president, when he said how important it is for the national security secrets of the nation be kept secret, particularly for people who leave office. So I think it's very important that the special counsel put that page into this indictment and put it before all of the charges, because we're speaking about knowledge. Clearly, this is a man who knew the importance of keeping secrets, national security secrets secret, the importance of classified documents. He said it in 2016. He said it when he was president. So it just shows the willfulness, the alleged willfulness and knowledge that this former president has done.
All right, Catherine, thank you. We'll ask you to stand by while I turn to NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Let's talk for a moment here about intent and how the government sees that in this overall narrative.
Yeah, and I would agree with Carol is saying, because it's really interesting how the government was very thorough in exactly what they wrote and delineating the willfulness, both while he was running for president, during the time he was president, and then all of the statements that he made after president, which not only show, as Carol was pointing out, the willfulness, the intent, and the importance of these documents, but it also goes to the classification of the documents and really bootstrapping that with the obstruction of justice charges, because then when you go down through the indictment as a whole, you saw the government actually delineate what type of documents they were. Talking about some of these documents dealt with intelligence, talking about nuclear capabilities. That is extremely important in classified secret information. Military capabilities, military attacks by a foreign country. And I thought this was interesting. Military capabilities of a foreign country. Those are information that, if gotten out, could really also affect our international allies, because depending on what information got out and who it got out to, that can really impede the security of not only our nation, but other nations as well.
All right, Kristen, thanks. Let me turn back to my panel here. And Danny, let me start with you. We're talking about some deep security secrets of this country. How do you do a case like this and not put that stuff out in the public realm?
There are actually special procedures for cases like this, normally used in the District of Columbia because it happens most often there. But certainly they'll have to be followed down here in the Southern District of Florida, even though it doesn't happen nearly as often as it happens up north in the District of Columbia.
So we're not going to see descriptions of weapon systems from foreign countries in the public view?
Absolutely not. And not only that, the government has to guard against the defense's use of discovery. They have to turn over that discovery to the defense, but also ensure that it's not gray-mailed, so to speak, that the defense doesn't use it in a way, or any defense that you hand over these kinds of sensitive documents to, that they don't handle it in a negligent way or even handle it. I'm not saying that's what Trump's defense would do, but there's an incentive to maybe say, hey, look, we have these documents. You know, do you really want to be handing these over to a defense if you're the government and worry about whether someone's going to email it out to somebody and then it's going to get hacked or something like that? So there are a lot of very sensitive procedures that have to be followed. What we will perceive, I suspect, is that will take the form of delay. Anything like that adds delay to a case because you're going to have redundant systems to make sure that these documents don't fly around through the internet, and that may involve extra security procedures. So believe me, the government is very mindful of this. You can see that in the indictment. They don't let out anything that is damaging. They just contain the bare minimum they need to let everyone know, to let the public know that the nature, the categories of documents that were sensitive.
That's one of the reasons there was always a risk not to bring this case in Washington, D.C. Of course, Washington, D.C. judges in the district court are so well versed in the process. They know the statutory process. They're so familiar with it. I think the idea was that they wouldn't have allowed for there to be a delay. Doesn't mean that federal judges in Florida aren't well versed in it, too. But D.C. judges go through this all of the time. And so that is a risk that, of course, the Justice Department appears to have felt it was more important to get the venue right? Of course, the venue is something that's constitutionally required. You have to charge it where the crime, at least part of the crime, happened. And you go through this document, and it's very clear they believe all of the operative acts happened in Florida, even though it appears he actually caused boxes to be moved to New Jersey, to Bedminster, because it started in Florida. That's where they're charging it.
Can I ask you about Jack Smith? He's going to speak in about 40 minutes from now. We'll leave it to others to judge if that's necessary or not. But what expectations would you have? What do you think that?
It's interesting that he's going to actually speak for the first time since his appointment last winter. We have not heard a peep out of him, but by design. He's playing this by the book. This is an experienced former prosecutor, a war crimes prosecutor who has sort of a dogged, aggressive reputation, but also he's playing this case by the book by not making a single statement about it, never giving a press conference.
But by speaking, is it an acknowledgement, though, that this, there is a political
I think he
sphere
has to fill the information vacuum. There's already been, 12 hours now with the former president and his allies attacking this case without us actually having our hands on the document. And so I think this is an attempt for him to explain himself, explain how he's reached these conclusions, and explain why this whole thing is not some political hit job the way that Mr. Trump has alleged.
And then, Danny, what's the other investigation in January 6th? Is that move that quicker now, or where does that leave that case?
I think we see that moving independently in a way that it always has. And of course, I think that would be venued up in D.C. And now, especially now that we're here in the Southern District of Florida on the documents case, I think it provides even more separation to a January 6th investigation, whether or not that investigation ever results in indictments at all. Those cases, I imagine, will proceed completely separately because this is a clear message that the venue is going to be separate. It's going to be here in Florida. And, my prediction on Jack Smith, I think you're going to see minimalist approach to speaking. He's already spoken. It's right here in the indictment, in the 50 pages or so of a speaking indictment where they lay out in plenty of detail, without going into too much sensitive detail, what they believe happened.
Well, my thanks to both of you for walking us through this and getting through that material very quickly and offering some great analysis. Appreciate it. That concludes this NBC News special report. We're going to hand off our coverage to my colleagues Ellison Barber and Vicki Nguyen right now.